The Knight Center for the Future of News, relatively new center here at the Cronkite School at ASU, and we're just so excited to do this. We're really helping envision and accelerate where the future of news is going and trying to figure it out. And I think you all are a part of that journey, and you all are definitely a part of this journey. And so I'm thrilled to have you here. We're going to have a good, lively discussion. There will be a chance for audience questions throughout, so I turn to you all at different times to participate. And with that, should we get underway?
Please.
Let's do it.
So this is a moment that we're in. You know, I think we describe this as this shifting from institutions to independence with a CE on the end there, but it also could be with a TS on the end there of independence. It's this shift that we're in where institutions are not fully leaving and new institutions are emerging, but we're in the middle of this shift. And so I thought I would start maybe with you, Rashida. Even just in the last couple of years, there have been so many fundamental shifts in how news is consumed. Tell me a little bit about how you're viewing the world now and how you've seen that change just in the last couple of years.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're seeing this shift from legacy media organizations, institutions really leading to now following. We're seeing legacy organizations trying to figure out how to capture the audience that independent content creators have organically built. And it shifts the power dynamic to where legacy organizations aren't as nimble because of their size. We were talking about this over lunch. You can't just take an organization of hundreds of people and stop down what you're doing and rebuild it the way that it should be built for 2026. So I think in a lot of ways they're at a disadvantage. They don't have the ability to be flexible. They don't have the ability to follow the changes in technology, the changes in audience consumption, to be as competitive as they were once upon a time. For the folks who were in the class that I spoke at earlier, we talked about this. There was a point in time where we were leading where you got content. We were telling you what time you were going to find out what was happening in the world. We were determining what platform you were watching it on. Now these organizations are chasing consumers because you guys are driving. You're in the driver's seat. Content creators can be nimble to find you where you are, and legacy organizations are right now, I think, trying to catch up.
And I'll get to you in just 1 second, Liz, but I want to hear one more beat on how your shift. So you from president of MSNBC with $1 billion budget and lots of people, lots of attention, stepped out of that role, and you've now just taken on this role with Piers Morgan. Tell us a little bit about what attracted you to that. Why is that where you are investing your time?
So for me, it was really the opportunity to build something from scratch. You know, I've worked in legacy media for my entire career. I've worked for big organizations. I've led big organizations. I felt like as I was watching the trends shift, I wanted to be a part of the shift. I was attracted to a couple of things in particular. I wanted something that was in a growth mode, an opportunity to be somewhere where I could expand what we were doing. I wanted to shift to more of a digital forward platform. You know, legacy media and legacy distribution is super important. It will always have a home, but we're seeing the trends shift to other places. And I wanted something that allowed me to stretch a bit beyond just news. You know, storytelling has become much more dynamic, much more diverse in genres, and I was really interested in something that allowed me to broaden my experience base, broaden my focus area, and shift into some other areas. And so building out Uncensored did all of those things. It allowed me to have this new interesting challenge of, you know, as I shared with you guys earlier, we have one US-based employee, and it's me. So I have to build a team. I also get to work in a global aspect with the team, largely based in London, but we've got huge audiences in India and Australia, and most of our audience in the US, so I get to have a broader perspective. And I just thought you get only so many moments to build something from scratch in media, and you only get so many opportunities to challenge yourself and shift. And I kind of felt like, if not now, I could do the same job for the next 20 years and it will feel similar. I can go do it somewhere else, it will feel similar. I really wanted something that felt like a new challenge.
Yeah, makes sense. Liz, what feels fundamentally different to you about this moment versus a couple years ago?
Well, I mean, there are so many factors that have come together. And, you know, as Rashida pointed out, the audience really is in the driver's seat now. It really is the audience that is making the decision about who's trustworthy and credible. And that's, by the way, as it should be, right? Like, I mean, I think in legacy media for a long time, we sometimes have become caught up in creating content that really is more for each other than actually for the end user and for the audience. And that's something that the audience recognized and started looking for alternative sources. I was talking with the staff of the state press earlier about the fact that trust in media in the United States is the lowest it has ever been in legacy media. It's at 28% for institutional media. That number was 74% when the Gallup organization started tracking in the 1970s. And it isn't that people are avoiding news, which is what we initially thought it was. It's that they are actually getting that information from different sources. So that is a change, and that's really important. The other change is just there is this thing that exists now called the creator economy that did not exist 20 years ago. Greg mentioned I was one of the first bloggers at the Washington Post. I was, and I had a really...
Did you call it blogging back then?
We did call it blogging, yeah. And I wrote a blog that was about celebrity news and TV, like from the Washington Post kind of point of view, like what does this tell us about ourselves as a culture? Had a really huge following, and the folks down at the Washington Post who were writing about policy and politics were really PO'd because I was just kicking their butt every single day in terms of traffic. That was 20 years ago. If I was doing that now, I could walk out of the Washington Post just like Dave Jorgensen, who was their TikTok guy, did, and instantly establish an audience and build an independent career because the creator economy exists. And so that is a factor that has made it possible in a way that has never been possible before for journalists to go and do this work direct to consumer without the mediation of a brand. And in many cases, and we talked about this at lunch as well, they are finding that they are more attractive to the audience because they're not associated with a brand that's viewed as less than trustworthy.
Obviously, we geeked out over lunch talking about the state of media. The one thing I wanted to add to that is it also allows for the content creator to be more responsive to the consumers, right? Like when you are in more traditional platforms, you might get Nielsen. If you're even just a legacy on digital, you'll get chart beat data and things like that. But when you're in direct to consumer mode, you also can see what people are responding to and with much more immediacy, and then shift and adjust what you're delivering them so you're meeting the demand. And I think that also, when you think about content creators and content created by independent journalists, it allows you to be more relevant and more timely than legacy can do.
Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Oh, I was just going to quickly add, actually, that responsiveness is a key part of the success of content creator journalism and content creators in general. It's that relationship that you have with an engaged audience. When we were talking upstairs, Jason Manning was sharing an example from our shared history of the Washington Post where a reader in the comments section said they were going to punch him in the face. And that was kind of the era where news organizations started pulling back from engaging with readers, saying, we're not going to let our reporters go in the comments section. And then you started seeing comment sections disappear entirely. That has changed now. And the trust that's being built with content creators and the loyalty and the willing, especially for newsletter writers, for the audience to pay $8 a month to get the content, a lot of that is because of the loyalty that's being built with this parasocial relationship, this engagement that's happening in those comments.
So we've all been in large organizations and now smaller organizations. What do the large news organizations still get right and bring to the table? And then I'll come back for what do they not quite understand about audiences?
I think it's a great question, and it's worth appreciating where they still provide value, and maybe that gives us the clue into how they can evolve into this era. And so, most larger or legacy organizations have very clear and strict policies around standards and legal vetting. And so you've got the infrastructure around you to be able to do that. Now, as independent journalists, and you can speak more deeply with this, you also can build resources to where you can tap into services like that. So you don't have to kind of wholesale build your own standards team, but there is a way to do that, and that's why these independent journalists still maintain their credibility. So you have that. You have reach. I'll use the cable networks as an example. While their audiences are declining because of cord cutting driving a big piece of that, when the moments happen, they spike. And so you still get those moments where when it matters, they can reach mass audiences. The problem is it's become increasingly difficult to do that consistently. Therefore, it's increasingly difficult to monetize it when you can't depend on an audience at a certain level. You're waiting for the world to crash for millions of people to tune in. And then the other piece, there is still, I would say, with traditional institutions a level of credibility and cachet around it. In comparison, it is much easier to get credentials to the White House press briefing as a declining legacy media organization than it is if I had double the audience on YouTube, but I'm not part of a legacy organization. So you do get some level of access there. And then one more thing I'll add, which again obviously says this industry is not dead, it just needs to evolve, is the ability to be on the front lines of stories. You have the resources to be able to fly a team into Iran and cover what's happening on the ground and go behind, closed borders and things like that. As an individual, it's much harder to do that safely, but as big organizations, you at least, when you can and when it matters, have the resources to be able to deploy to places that others can't go.
Yeah, that's all true. And I should tell you, I left legacy media specifically to work with journalists who are making their way in the creator space because I see that they need the support, and I also see that's where audiences are going. But that doesn't mean that legacy media is dead or that it's a binary either or. I think that we are in a middle phase right now where things are in flux, and we're going to see a new normal, a new balance, and a new value that is coming out of legacy media, understanding what they can do that creators can't do independently. Like one of the things, it's not just access, it's scaled resources for things like deep investigative work and enterprise journalism, data visualization journalism, a lot of these things that you do need a big team for. But a lot of the commodified work that we were chasing over the last 2 decades as news organizations, you need to stop doing that, as a news organization, because that's not getting you anywhere. It's not deriving value. And in many cases, a lot of news orgs are still doing that just because simply that's what they've been doing and keep doing it. And so they need to learn to be a little bit more nimble and really think about what is the value that they bring. We are starting to see also some really open-minded and interesting news organizations start to think about how can they start partnering with creators and creator journalists, because there are gains to be made on both sides. One of the things that traditional news organizations and legacy media has is infrastructure. One thing that creator model journalism really needs is infrastructure, right? All of these things like liability insurance and protection for journalists traveling in war zones, or data viz teams, or access and press credentialing. So what are the ways that we can start seeing symbiotic relationships come together that will allow both to benefit? And for the news organizations, what they are doing often, if they are partnering with creator journalists, is they are getting access to audiences that they might not have been reaching otherwise, and in some cases, access to spaces that they would not be in otherwise. There are some news organizations that we're working with in Chicago that we're partnering with local creators who are actively producing news and building audiences in neighborhoods that have traditionally been disenfranchised by mainstream media in the city of Chicago. And so by partnering with creators who are actually building trust with those audiences, they are able to actually borrow some credibility and trust from the creators and bring that back to their news organizations. So I think there's actually a hopeful and optimistic way that we can look at this from both sides. But I also know from working in traditional news organizations for 30 years and being a journalist for 30 years that we can be very fearful of change, right? And very scared about somebody taking our cheese. So we need to stop thinking that way.
I want to pick up on something you said, and I think it's important to drill down on this, and I think especially for this group. We're in this period of transition and change, right? And so legacy media organizations are trying to figure out how to fit into this new normal. Content creator organizations individuals are trying to figure out how to build the audience, the reach, how to use their independence to their advantage. For someone who is newly entering the workforce, you kind of get the best of both worlds in some cases in the way of opportunities. There's a road that you can go down in the legacy space that it can be fruitful and lead to lots of opportunities. There's a road you can go down in the content creator space that can lead to opportunities. There are hybrid opportunities. You talked about some partnerships between the two. You guys are in some ways at an advantage in that you still have access to both. We haven't transitioned over to solely content creator driven opportunities. You guys are not in the era where it was only legacy media or bust. You kind of get a little bit of both worlds. And I think as you're thinking about your next move, your next steps, how do I find a home in this evolving in real time industry, you've got options. And I think thinking about how you could exist in either or both or create some through lines in those worlds is a real opportunity.
It definitely feels like there's this shift that we're in, right? We're not all the way in one, not all the way in the other.
Shifting
and we may
and active,
not,
yeah.
Right, and we may do a lot of sort of shifting back and forth. I think you're seeing creators sort of come together into networks of creators that are working together on things. So on the creator space, obviously there's a lot of opportunity. Lots of people are saying like, great, I'm going to go do this, or I've chosen to do this, or they're doing it because they no longer are employed by a news organization. So great opportunity. It's also really hard. It's a really hard business. It does not easily scale, does not make that much money. Some people do well, some do not. So those were the easy questions. Now the harder question, is it possible that have we been sort of over romanticizing the creator space? Is it too much of like, everyone could be a creator? Have we
yes and no. Like there are two prevailing theories. Like one is like what I would call like the Don Lemon effect, right? Like where people see Don Lemon, Joy-Ann Reid, Kara Swisher, like others who are able to, Piers Morgan, right? Go from traditional media and immediately step into Substack or YouTube and have a scaled audience and be making $1 million or more in the first year. And so, like, yes, that can be romanticized. Like, yes, I can walk out the door and like create a career. All I have to do is launch a YouTube channel or a Substack and I'll be making money. At the other end of the spectrum, there's the other narrative, which is only Don Lemon can do that. Right, only somebody who comes from a big national-facing or news organization who brings an audience with them is able to do that, and there is a wide spectrum in between those two poles where we're seeing a lot of movement and a lot of ability to build a career in that space. It is not easy, as you said. We see generally that it takes about 12 to 18 months of ramping up for somebody who is coming into this new. Even for journalists who are coming from a news organization, who were maybe a beat reporter, who were not necessarily the star talent, it's going to take a while to build that up. You also need to learn something. A lot of us in the journalism space have not learned the business side of this. And not only the business side of journalism, but now learning about the creator economy and like what levers you can pull. And so a lot of the work that we do with Project C is teaching that. Teaching what are the things that you need to learn in addition to the journalism to actually make it in this space. What are the revenue sources that you can draw on to make money? Like there are many different, and they're not dissimilar from the ways that legacy media makes money. Advertising, reader revenue, philanthropic funding are like the big levers. Some consumer revenue. There are some variations that make it a little bit easier. Like we can take Stripe payments now, like that sort of thing. But it takes real work to do it. So yeah, it's a little bit romanticized, but I see people who are making this choice every single day and being successful, and they are not, partaking in the Don Lemon effect or in the Piers Morgan effect and making millions of dollars, but it is not impossible to replicate a newsroom salary and to pay your bills, to pay your rent, to put your kids through college, to take a nice vacation, to save a little money for retirement. You just have to work at it.
Rashida, what's your take?
I agree with every single word that Liz was saying, and I was kind of taking mental notes. The only other thing I will add is, and you're absolutely right, the business models largely mirror what legacy looks like. The difference is, if you're a Don Lemon or a Joy Reid or a Jim Acosta or whatever, that wasn't part of your universe. Your role was to go have a point of view and go in front of the camera and tell the people that and build that engagement. You never had to think about, how am I making money? Because you were a salaried employee versus a business owner. You never had to think about, we talked about this a little bit in class, IP ownership and how do I structure this so I own my creative and I've got it in perpetuity and I can build revenue from my archives. Like you never even had to think about this stuff. So I think the opportunity, yes, everyone can't go, if everyone could go do it, everyone would go do it. But there's more opportunity, and I think it's much more democratized in this space. And then there are also a number of new businesses. With this new content creator economy comes new ancillary businesses. which could be something that somebody here either starts one or you engage with one that can help you figure out monetization, can help you figure out marketing, can help you figure out SEO strategy. Those businesses didn't exist a few years ago. And so the tools are starting to, can go out and sell your inventory. Those tools are starting to exist. They themselves are startup entities. But the business around it and the structure around it is starting to develop, so it makes it easier for other people to kind of jump into this space.
Today is Local News Day, which you may have seen online. There's a sort of an effort around let's get people to pay attention to local news and subscribe.
Very important.
Very important. And a lot of, obviously, I think all of us have worked in local in some capacity, right? Where's the opportunity for innovation in local news that you see right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that first. So we see a lot of movement in the local news sector in the creator space. There are a ton of people who feel that their communities aren't being adequately covered. Certainly not Phoenix, where we have the amazing Arizona Republic, right? But there are a lot of communities across the country that have been identified by studies like Medill's study on news deserts, right? Where people are taking it upon themselves to step into the breach and tell those stories about what's happening in their community or provide that public service. An example that I can give you is actually Chicago. I did a study with Medill last year that was released in December, where Medill, like their local news initiative, has traditionally tracked about 150 news sources in the Chicago area, many nonprofits, many kind of like smaller newsrooms. We set out with this theory that there were many more that were not being tracked and many more that were probably creators. We ended up finding 100 more that we consider to be credible news sources. So we brought that list up above 250. And interestingly, like a big portion of them were creators, but not all. Many of them were also like what you would call micro newsrooms. And they are often, like many creators, they are not general news publications. They are publications or blogs or newsletters or YouTube channels that are covering something very specific, whether it's a neighborhood in Chicago or a particular identity or community or like group of interest or affinity, whether it's parents or the LGBTQ community. And so that has had a big impact on the local news space, and we are seeing that happen across the country to the point where you have like newsletter platforms like Beehive that are actively encouraging the people who are creating content for local communities to come together and learn from one another and start networking, right? And I think for Beehive, like they see a business opportunity in that as well as an ancillary. How can we start selling local advertising against these content?
I also would point to kind of an addendum to the poll that you talked about, trusted news, the number has dropped to 28%, but in local, the numbers are much higher.
That's absolutely right.
So leaning into the advantage that local has in being considered more trustworthy to its audiences, I think creates an opportunity. You talked about microsites. The number one shared media outlet in my household is HobokenGirl.com. This one woman.
I know her.
You know
yes,
her?
Yes.
We all share it around the house, and she covers Hoboken in Jersey City, and we live in Jersey City. And there's something about the fact that she knows the community, and she knows the shops, and she knows the patterns, and she knows that the path entrance is flooded and people are complaining about it. There is something to be said, especially now that I'm in this space where I feel like a civilian consumer. When I was running MSNBC, I told someone this the other day and they were shocked. I had 10 televisions in my office where I could constantly watch every single thing that was on all the time. I don't do that in my current world, so I'm consuming more like a regular consumer, a civilian consumer, and I go to sources like that because I trust the fact that if she has a recommendation for a place to go or a new business coming in or a controversial topic, she's got to live a couple blocks away from me because we live right between Hoboken and Jersey City, and she knows what she's talking about. And so I think that trust is a space to lean in on as content creators are thinking about how to leverage the local dynamic.
Yeah, and I would say Hoboken Girl has an incredibly healthy advertising business with local advertising, for sure.
I was going to say Prince of Popville in D.C. Like, that's someone who knows the community. You can find these people all over the place.
Yeah.
I do want to Oprah this up a little bit, and you don't need to look under your chairs. No one's getting a car. But I would love to open it up for questions and thoughts from the audience. What's resonating? What makes sense here? Where are your questions? Anyone want to jump in the back? I'll tell you what, I am going to actually Oprah this. Hold on.
Look at you.
This.
Hi, I'm Katie Wilcox. I'm one of our faculty here, and I think the big thing that I was kicking around when you guys are talking about maybe 2 weeks ago, Michael Costa from The Daily Show, right? I think he published that he had 1 million views in 2 weeks on Meta and made 35 cents. And I think that why I bring this up is because, you know, we talk about the difficulty of this economy, but the real problem that I have is the journalists actually, independent journalists actually don't have any control over their publishers, right? It's Meta, it's TikTok, it's maybe YouTube, right? So we have these handful of very, very small companies that have a huge control over what is released and how it gets ranked and whose algorithm will see it.
How it gets monetized.
How it's monetized, thank you. And so as much as I think we've changed into being, and I do think you're right, definitely 10 years ago or something, but as these companies have become more powerful and as they've decreased the amount of responsibility that they don't have to act like publishers. They don't have to take any responsibility for when someone's lying, when they're making it up entirely. And so I actually think they've taken away power from journalists. And I guess I say all of that to bring to this question of why don't journalists, or at least a technology company that chooses to align with journalistic principles, like it seems like that's the only real answer, to have a technology company align with our journalistic principles and then actually act as a real publisher with some sort of integrity and values. How do we get there? What is the chance there? And is that something maybe universities would ever make?
Right. I mean, so the problem that we're facing is, you know, unfortunately, for better or for worse, like these distributed platforms are where the audiences are, especially the younger audiences. So, you know, there have been some attempts of people who are trying to build separate platforms that are, you know, for creator model journalism. Newsphere is one. There are a couple of others that have been experiments, and they are doing, like they are aligning with journalism, and in many cases, they are people who are getting good funding to build these out from places like the Knight Foundation and others to build these separate platforms that are both a technology and a journalism-friendly solution, but they don't have the audience. The audience isn't coming to them because then you're asking the audience to go to this other place where they're not experiencing other stuff. Like what we know, especially about young audiences, is that they are experiencing news in what's called time pass mode, where they aren't usually actively going and seeking out journalism content. It's coming to them in their feeds along with viral dances, recipes, travel videos, like all of this other stuff, right? And so in a way, you're right, there is this dynamic of the technology companies are giving people almost like this entertainment experience, and so now journalism is just another part of that entertainment experience. With the folks that we work with at Project C and in the Independent Journalism Atlas, like we are very concerned about the power that the technology companies have over them, because most of the people that I work with are small business owners, right? They're not making millions of dollars. They're making maybe $100,000 if they're lucky, and that can all go away very easily if TikTok changes its algorithm because it's now been, you know, acquired by the Ellisons, and they have a particular point of view on the kind of content they want to see show up, or because Meta doesn't regulate content anymore. And so what we are increasingly doing is encouraging them to be multi-platform. So like if you think of it as like playing roulette, we're saying put your chips on every platform so that you are showing up everywhere, so that if one falls out, you're not losing your entire business. And we are also encouraging them to find a way to have access to first-party data about their followers. So if somebody is primarily a video creator, we encourage them to launch a newsletter or a website where they can collect the email addresses for their followers, so at least they can have that direct relationship with them. Newsletters, to me, like actually are the purest relationship and the purest journalistic way that we can actually be reaching audiences right now. But again, like, you know, the younger the audiences get, the less they're actually consuming written content. It's all video.
Rashida, can I ask you, as you're continuing to build this company, are you thinking in these ways?
I'm taking Liz's business model that she just described and applying it. Really, it's those two things: diversify revenue streams and own the data of your audience. That is the I think at the moment the most secure way to ensure that you're not over reliant on any one platform. You know, when I joined the team also a month ago, one of my first observations is we're so reliant on YouTube revenue, and if they change direction today, tomorrow, get bought, get merged, then this is all very fragile. And so we've been very focused on how do we quickly diversify, and then number two, what are the right partners and platforms that give us a more direct connection to who the audience is so they become connected to us, not the platform.
Speaking of platforms, I want to turn for a second to AI, which we haven't spent much time talking about, but obviously is a big part of the industry and the future of the industry. As you see around here on the second floor, we've been asking students to weigh in a little bit on their
This has been
relationship
really
with AI.
informative and educational.
Yeah.
Just me reading this stuff and having a sense of where you guys are and how you feel about it.
My sense in reading this, and I think we've heard this a little bit, there's a little bit of skepticism and a little bit of apprehension among students or among the next generation about how much they want to use AI or rely on AI or how they want it to be integrated. And I think there may be a bit of excitement from leadership at organizations saying AI, and the next generation saying, hold on a second, let's be responsible about this. How's that factor in, do you think?
So here's how I would look at it. I'll start with leadership, and then I'll start with people entering the workforce. So from a leadership perspective, I think a lot of organizations are looking at the opportunities to save, to cut costs, save revenue, create efficiencies out of necessity. I'll say in media organizations in particular, as budgets are shrinking, as revenue from advertising and subscriptions are declining, we could get to a point where we can't afford to run newsrooms in certain locations, or we can't afford to run at scale, or we have to decide, do we really cover the news on weekends because our budgets just don't allow us to do so. And so I think a lot of media organizations, part of the motivation is trying to figure out, in order to continue the public service that we do, where can we find savings in our processes, where can we find savings and where we're spending money. If you think about the cost of doing business for a legacy media organization, it is massive. It is massive. And so how do we continue the stretch longer than perhaps what our finances allow? So largely speaking, I think a lot of the motivation comes from that. I think the concern is all very valid, and it falls into three categories. One is what does it do to me as a person? How does using this technology create over-dependence, over-reliance? How does it change my creativity outlets, how I think, how I operate? Very valid and concerning. Number two, how does this change the calculus of opportunities as I'm entering the workforce? The jobs that used to be the entry-level jobs are becoming increasingly automated. We were joking at lunch. My first job in television was what we called ripping scripts. And it was carbon copy, go look it up. And I had to literally take the carbon out and organize the pages by color and give a different color to each anchor. That was, and I rolled the teleprompter. I was making $5.25 an hour to do that, okay? I guarantee you there is not, well, maybe not anywhere, but most of that work is automated right now. So the dynamic is changing, and I very much understand the concern, which is the second concern, that my ability to go into the workforce is being compromised because these jobs are becoming automated. Valid concern. And then the third concern is, what is this doing to the world around me? Your generation is rightfully so increasingly concerned about what happens tomorrow. And how does this impact our earth? And how does this impact our future? A lot of the concern, and I've captured some of this here, but as I shared, these are the conversations that are happening at universities across the country, and any university I go to or any young person I talk to, like, they largely fall into those three buckets. They're all very valid concerns, and I think part of the tension and part of the opportunity is to figure out how do you implement the technology in the right way that allows for the sustainability of the business, which as business leaders you have to think about. But how do we do it in a way that doesn't completely shatter the next generation of opportunities of individuals and what it does to the world? And I don't have necessarily a clean answer of how we get there, but I think it's got to be somewhere that satisfies both.
Yeah. Liz, are we getting things fundamentally wrong about AI?
I think we're just still figuring it out, right? It's also new and it's changing so quickly. I mean, things that you can do today with AI, you couldn't do 2 months ago. And it's growing in a way that is snowballing. So it's hard to predict whether we're getting it right or wrong. I think what we see are a lot of people who are, experimenting with AI. There was a piece that was written in The Verge last week that was interviewing journalists about how they're using AI, independent journalists, right? And it ranged on one end from Alex Heath, who writes a newsletter for The Verge, who said he's letting the AI write his newsletter now. And his, justification for that was that the important part of the job for him is the reporting, not the actual not the actual giving of the facts and actually pulling it together for his audience. That doesn't interest him. I'm not sure how I feel about that, right?
I'm there too. I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
I don't
exactly
hate it, but I don't love it. We're figuring it out.
Right, exactly. But, with a lot of folks who are working independently, right, who are working by themselves, who are solo operators, it's going to be almost impossible to continue to do that work without using AI. And there are really easy cases to use it for, working on the business side, right? Doing a lot of the work to administer a small business, you can now delegate a lot of that to an AI agent like Claude Cowork and do that. But, the questions really, I think, that we still need to figure out are on the content creation. And so my best advice right now for creator journalists working independently, for news organizations like Greg's staff, and for you students is be transparent about how you're using it.
Yeah.
I had I was chatting with a candidate for a role that I'm recruiting for, and he put together this whole presentation, and he started with, the ideas are mine, but I just want to be transparent. I use Claude for the layout. And it was really refreshing because I didn't necessarily think negatively because he disclosed that, but I don't think I had ever had anyone disclose it before. It's the signals, the layout. If you put an emoji in the body, that is not something that humans do. But he was very transparent, and I thought it was really interesting, and it made me respect, and it took out this layer of thinking of how much of this is him, how much of it was the computer. He's like, these are all my ideas. I just use Claude to help lay it out and make it.
And when trust is so fragile right now anyway,
Right.
the more we can do to be honest about all of this, the better.
I will say the flip side of that is also that the job that AI cannot do is go knock on doors and pick up the phone and call someone. I mean, I guess it
Not yet.
technically can, but right, but not in the same way.
But when the tragedy happens,
right,
and you need to talk to the mother of the victim and understand who the human was behind that tragedy, that is something that requires the care and touch of a true journalist. When you have a team who's gone through a hellish weekday month of coverage, and you've got to be the one to motivate them to continue to do the work, that is what a journalist leader does. Some of the tasks can be automated, but there's still so much of what we do, holding the powerful to account. An agent cannot sit in the White House press briefing and press the White House press secretary to better understand what's happening in our world, or sit in front of a lawmaker, or sit in front of a powerful leader and try to understand, how do I take this bit of information and help the world in front of us? There's so much of the core of what we do and how we do the reporting is human. How the order of the words is not as important as the reporting itself.
I obviously pulled something when I ran back into the audience earlier, so I will not run out there in my amazing feat of athleticism. What are you laughing about?
Nopra.
I think you've got some mic runners then.
Yes, I was going to say we have skilled mic runners. Other questions from the crowd? Anyone want to weigh in? I've got lots more questions. I'll keep going, but no one needs to hear me talk. Well, okay, yes, in the back. Yes, Chris.
See, she's not running. She's just casually
I know.
walking.
I should learn.
She won't pull anything. Smart gal.
Hi, Rashida, Liz. Already mind blown hearing some of the insights that you have. I'm curious if there is a journalist or if there's a student that wants to dive into this creator economy, what are some things that you say to people that are feeling that, oh, well, I don't have X, Y, and Z equipment, or I would need to have this broadcast persona, or it's almost that scarcity. What do you tell people in that situation?
This is what you do.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I do. So the good thing is like what consumers are looking for on distributed social platforms is not a broadcast persona or slickly produced content. I'll give you an example. There is a journalist named Peter Hamby who produces a show on Snapchat, and I think it's called Good Luck America. And when they hired Peter to do this, he had come from a broadcast background. He launched the show. They built a huge studio. Snapchat spent a ton of money building the studio and hiring a staff, and the show just was a dud. Was not popping. People were not watching it because the audience on Snapchat is primarily teenagers. And this was not the kind of content that they were into. So what they did was they took Peter and took him out of the studio and had him actually start filming himself with his cell phone in his kitchen, just talking about the same stories, the same content, not scripted at all, and it suddenly went through the roof. So TLDR, you don't need all of that equipment. Really, you can start doing this. What audiences are looking for on distributed platforms is authenticity and that connection that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, cosign.
There was a question we were, in prepping for this, was talking with our terrific graduate students about this, and so this is Emily's question that I'm going to call out. Emily, thank you for this. As we're in this creator space, and there's this encouragement for that authenticity and for that, personal voice maybe is the right word for it, and perspective, which is actually okay now. What does that do to bias in the industry? Are we okay with that? I would add, are we shooting ourselves in the foot because we're allowing that perspective to come through?
I think what's most important is being transparent about what the content is, what the intention of it is. It's hard to say journalists shouldn't provide context, perspective, or their life experiences if that's also what their audience is interested in and what the audiences are consuming. I do think it's a mistake for a journalist, whether it's an individual or an organization, to mask or pretend as facts when it is their opinion. So I think the clarity around transparency is what's most important. I think, every single person has some bias because our life experiences are different. I think being honest and open about it is what is fair and just to the audience. And my opinion, and some people may not agree with this, is let the audience decide. There are lots of options out there for content. If I want to know today's headlines and old school headline news style, there's a place I can go. If I want to know what this community thinks about, there's a place I can go. I'm also, and I think our consumers are sophisticated enough to discern on some level, but also to seek out the type of format and perspectives of content that they're interested in.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and build on that one of the top reasons that people cite for mistrust in mainstream media is this continued insistence that mainstream media organizations are impartial. And audiences are sophisticated enough to see through that and to see the implicit bias that's coming through. So on the other side, where creator model journalism is often very transparent about their biases, that's actually seen in survey after survey of audiences as being more trustworthy because at least there's honesty there. So, yeah.
Yes, question over here.
How can an independent journalist be strategic in being accurate and maintaining integrity while meeting the demands of speed in the digital content creation space?
Great question. Thank you.
I think it's an excellent question, and I would point to two things. One, I'll use the word again, transparency in your reporting. I love process reporting. I love being able to tell the audience, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're trying to figure out, and not allowing the internet or the competition or someone who's not following those journalistic ideals to force you to get ahead of the reporting. I mean, we had to deal with this a lot, especially during breaking news and the pace of a story breaking in real time. And we've been on the air for hours with rolling coverage with 3 lines of actual fact, and we're trying, and others are reporting things ahead of us. For me, it was never more important to be first or fast than it was to be accurate. But there is a happy medium between putting your head in the sand and pretending that this information is out there and jumping ahead of the reporting. And so I think transparency in the reporting and using process reporting is a tool to be able to say, I know there is, some information out there about who the shooter is or who the victims are. We've seen the reports as well. What we do know is this, and this. We don't know yet if that is accurate, but we're working on getting that information. And as it comes in, here's how we're trying to report that out. We're talking to the sheriff. We're in the neighborhood. Like that kind of thing, I think helps to stave off kind of the temptation of feeling like you've got to get ahead of the reporting. And then the reporting itself, I think it's just the fundamental old school journalistic standards that you guys talk about in your programs and that you kind of continue to build on as a journalist, and not compromising those things because the platforms are faster or the audience has more access to you. Like, it was as important as it was before social media existed as it is today, and I think not allowing temptation to force you ahead of it is important.
It's a perfect answer. I have nothing to add.
Amazing. All right, so lightning round real quick. All right, one more quick audience question.
I don't know how quick it's going to be, but
okay, never mind.
Circling back
settle
to Rashida's comment about letting the audience, pick their source for news. Does that make? I mean, I'm old enough that I remember my parents watching Walter Cronkite on the news, and he was the trusted source. He was like one of three. You either watched NBC, ABC, CBS. And now with so many people, so many different opinions and so many different facts, how do we stop the fragmentation of society?
No, I think it's a very legitimate question, and I also miss the era where things were simpler and the fact was the fact, and we all agreed that bad things were bad things and good things were good things. I fear that we're in a different era now, and I don't know that you can put the toothpaste back in the tube in the way that it was before. And so, part of my approach there is being transparent about what you are and what you're offering the audience. If you decide as an entity or an organization, we're just going to be the who, what, when, where. I'm old enough to remember when we were taught who, what, when, where, and why is all you did in journalism, and why was kind of questionable. Like, do you really need to talk about that much context? We're just in a different era right now, and so part of the solution is making sure you're transparent with what your process is, what your style and approach to the news is. And then number two, making sure as reputable news entities, you're appearing in the same neighborhoods as some of this other content. There was an era where I didn't necessarily feel comfortable putting our content on a platform like Twitter, because it started changing dynamic, and it became even more divisive and body and just negative. And I thought, like, why would we associate in that neighborhood? Like, that's an unsafe neighborhood. And I quickly pivoted to thinking, but we need to be an alternative to people and organizations who are intentionally trying to misinform, who are intentionally trying to soil the water. We need to be an alternative because audiences are there anyway. Audiences are consuming on TikTok. I thought what you said about kind of being, news content being mixed in with all this other stuff, is just reality. And so rather than not appear next to the cooking video and the dance video, I'd rather be a part of that feed. I remember early on when we started our TikTok at MS, my son, who, I don't know, he had to be 15 or 16 at the time, he's 20 now, he called me, he's like, someone is impersonating you guys on TikTok. And I was like, no, we have a TikTok. He's like, why are you on TikTok? Like, he didn't even believe it was MSNBC. But guess what? He saw the content. He was at least respectful enough on election nights. He would turn on and take a picture and show that he knows what channel MSNBC is, and then he'd go do his own thing. So he would never watch linear television. But all of a sudden, the content was showing up in his feed, and he was seeing it to the point he didn't even think it was us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I would add to your question about, like, I also grew up, watching the evening news and my dad reading the Washington Post and putting like a little check mark next to the articles he thought my mom and I should check out. That was great, and it was a great era to live through for me and for us and for people like me. There were a lot of people who were left out of that coverage too. And were not feeling like they were being spoken to or taken into account. So, it's a double-edged sword. There are more sources now, and so there's more fragmentation, but there are also more people who feel that they can find a news source or a personality who makes sense because they feel some sort of kinship with them. They share an identity, or they share, like, they live in the same community. They have, like, things in common that make sense for them. So that's a really important distinction, I think, that we need to think about as we go forward.
It's a great point. And the power was in the hands of a few. Now the power is also in the hands of a few tech companies and the people who run those, and how the algorithms are run.
You're going to fix that, though, with the Knight Center for the Future of Journalism.
I'm sorry?
You're going to fix that.
Oh, absolutely.
We're passing the baton.
Yeah, great. Okay, lightning round real fast because we're running out of time. I have not shared these questions in advance. Just give me your quick 5-second reaction to each question. Are you ready?
Okay. Yep.
All right, here we go. If you could switch jobs with anyone in the industry, who would it be? Liz.
Rashida Jones. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, it's the other end of what I'm doing, for sure.
Right. Rashida.
I would, and I'm not saying this to kiss up, but Dean Batts. Like, I think what you guys are doing here is so cool. He's not even here, so I'm not even getting credit for this. Feeding the next generation. The facilities are amazing. You guys are a global entity. Like, this is really, really cool. And being here, seeing it, makes me want to be a part of it even more.
Rashida, fellow for life. That's great. Okay, let's see. Favorite indie creator right now?
Indie creator. I would say that one of my favorite indie creators right now is a journalist named Monique Madan, who's an investigative journalist who left the Miami Herald. She was laid off and now has her own newsletter called Two Can Be True. And she actually broke a story last month about a ICE detention facility in Florida where the guards thought that it would be really cool to make badges that say Alligator Alcatraz. And that story ended up being picked up by the Miami Herald, her former home, in a great show of faith and independent creator journalism, and picked up all over the world. So I point her out
Lightning round. Yeah.
Anyway, yes. To finish that thought, because there is real investigative, cool work that's happening in this space.
Fair.
I would
Rashida,
say,
you cannot say Piers Morgan.
What was that?
You may not say Piers Morgan.
No, not Piers. I like him a lot, but not. I would say, what's his face? Aaron Rupar, the guy who watches all the Trump administration press conferences and just posts what was said and no context. I like that.
Okay. Favorite MSNBC talent to hang out with? No, I'm not going to make you do that. Journalistic hill you will die on. It can be serious. It can be fun.
Transparency and honesty and fact-based information.
People's stories matter.
I was just going to say, don't let the sources hold the microphone. But that's just me. And hide the lavalier cord, my gosh. Okay. Last thing, I think when we think about the future of news and the work that we're doing at the center, we're trying to be pragmatically optimistic. So we're not just saying things are going to be amazing, right? There are going to be challenges to get there. And we want to be pragmatic about what has worked and what hasn't worked. My last question to you is, and you can keep this as brief or as long as you'd like, where do you see the optimism today? And I think I may have started, I can't recall who I started with, so either.
I would just say the entrepreneurial opportunities that exist now. You can go create the job. When we were starting in the business, you started at a traditional outlet that maybe was a smaller entity. If you were interested, you'd work your way up the ladder there or work your way up the ladder in other organizations. Now, in some ways, the opportunities are infinite. They're endless, and you can go build it yourself. I cannot imagine being 22 or 23 and saying, I'm going to go start my own show and my own blog and my own podcast and just get it to people directly. Our creativity didn't even think that way. And so I think that's where I'm incredibly optimistic about where we are now, because you guys get to actually write what the next chapter looks like.
Yeah, and I'm actually really optimistic about audiences. We've been looking at year after year of studies about news avoidance and people not engaging with news, and it turns out that's not true, right? That they're just getting it from different sources, and that makes me really happy. Part of the reason that I started doing this work and moving into the creator space was because, like Rashida, I have a teenager, and his primary news source is YouTube. And he does come to me and say, hey, like, is this true? Like, I had an example with him where a couple of years ago he came to me and said, so there's this guy named Andrew Tate on YouTube, and he says X, Y, and Z. And it's like, you know, I had to have a big talk with him about Andrew Tate and like do some fact checking with him, but at least he's engaging with the world, right? And so like the work that Rashida's doing, the work that I'm doing, the work that you all are going to do to build the future of journalism is to make sure that there's credible information that's making its way into those algorithms. We're not going to give up.
Great. I want to thank all of you, whether you were here for the free food or for the extra credit. Yeah, the extra credit people. I know who you are. That's fine. Or if you were here just for a great conversation, I'm so glad you all took time out of your day to join us. So thank you all very much. I want to thank the event staff and the tech staff and the staff from the Knight Center for the Future of News so much for all of your help. If we can switch, oh great, already switched. You can follow what we're doing here, scan that QR code. You can visit us at the Knight Center website. We'd love to keep you in the loop of what we're doing. And of course, I could not think of two better people to join us to help us think about where we're going, where we've been and where we're going. Liz Kelly Nelson, Rashida Jones, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all so much for joining us.